the story really started to happen when you were seeing things as a fighter pilot, and not just you, but your colleagues. And you were seeing objects that had different trajectories, or you couldn't see them on the radar, or you could see them and that they wouldn't appear on the radar, and they had different speed trajectories and so on and so forth. And you start to see this often enough where it was becoming concerning for you.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess the first thing, if you don't mind explaining to the listener, what were you seeing? Give us an example what you and your colleagues, your other fighter pilot colleagues, were seeing.
Certainly. So what we were seeing at first was nothing with our eyeballs, but simply data on our radar suggesting that there were objects in areas that we weren't expecting to see them. And our radar can look out very far, much further than we can visually see things usually. So we're accustomed to seeing things that are way out there that may or may not be a factor to us. But these objects were typically, or mostly, I should say, within our working areas. And we would expect nothing to be out there. The only thing we would expect to be out there are other F-18s or the occasional Cessna that might come through that gets called out and gets rerouted. But to have objects in there on a regular basis, it was a bit shocking. We also had just updated our radars. And so even just say the day before, you could have been flying on a flight, not seeing anything in the areas. And then perhaps the next flight, you're in an upgraded jet. And now you're seeing multiple objects in those working areas. It makes you wonder if you were just lucky on the last flight not to hit one or what. But even at this early stage, we didn't necessarily know whether they were physical objects or not. We just saw that they were on the radar. Eventually, we did get close enough for our other sensors, such as our FLIR, which is essentially a camera system, to see them. And we were seeing IR energy. Essentially, it looked like something was shining an IR flashlight at our jet, essentially. We weren't seeing the skin of an aircraft or anything like that, but it did lead us to believe that these were now, or at least we had to respect the fact that these could potentially be physical objects now that we're seeing, two sensors corroborating the same information at the same point.
And those remained unidentified. Like no one knew possibly what they could be. Were there any guesses, any educated guesses on what they could be?
Yeah, at this point, we were perhaps thinking that this was some type of drone or something of that nature, but we ended up seeing these visually with our own eyeballs not too long afterwards. And what it looked like, what these objects looked like up close, at least when we could see them, was a dark gray or black cube inside of a clear sphere. No propellers, no tether, no lifting wings, anything of that nature. And these would often be stationary for long periods of time, but then they would also just start moving again at 0.6 or 0.8 Mach, which is somewhere around 240 or 330 knots, somewhere in that vicinity. So that's, kind of like cruising speed for a jet. And so not how we would expect a round cylindrical object, or spherical, I should say, object to behave or to stay airborne for those long periods of time with those large speeds as well.
When you first described that on Joe Rogan podcast, that blew me away. So there was a dark cube that touched the inside corners of a transparent sphere. Is that right?
Yeah. So the word that was used to describe it to me at the time was clear sphere. I have somewhat translated that to translucent sphere, just because, it was perfectly clear, then you wouldn't really know there was a sphere there. So, how was it? But that information, it doesn't exist, right? I just have to assume that it wasn't perfectly clear, or else we wouldn't have known it was there in a sense, right? So I kind of used the word that was used at the time was clear, but I've since used clear or translucent sphere for that purpose.
You're flying a very capable aircraft, some of the world's most technically capable aircraft. The maneuvers that you saw they were undertaking were far more advanced than what your aircraft could do.
We didn't see anything that was in any one instant of time, for the most part, that was overly exotic. So what I mean by that is, the F-18 can go 1.1, 1.2 Mach, right? Not very long. We can do it for a little bit, and we have to do it in a dive, but we can do it. Mm-hmm. And these things were doing that as well, but they were, just kind of head east at those high speeds, with no destination in sight. Or an F-18 can go 0.6 and 0.8 Mach for a while too, but these things would do it all day. They'd be at those speeds all day. An F-18 can't just hover. Of course, a helicopter or drone, things of that nature can, but they can't just hover for long periods of time and then go zero point 0.8 Mach or 1.1 Mach out to the ocean. And so these things, they at any one time, they weren't behaving in weren't demonstrating exotic behavior that F-18 couldn't necessarily do. But when you observe their behavior over time, it doesn't make sense that they'd be able to do all those things for that long period of time with no apparent, mission or, purpose of being there.
Did you see any of them enter the water as well?
No, but we're not really in a great position to determine if something was to enter the water in an F-18. 99% of everything that happens in the tactical environment like that happens outside the visual range. And so we'd never see it, anyways, unless we were just in the miraculous right piece of sky at the right time. And furthermore, our radars, depending on the waves and stuff of the water, can become less reliable near the surface of the water. So there could be uncertainty, but it would either be there or it wouldn't be there, but there would be no transition into the water that we'd be able to, delineate just off of our jet.
You're a guy in his 20s, you're highly trained. You explained to me too, your trajectory. You're very lucky in order to land a fighter jet. But you were highly trained. You did service as well in the Middle East. So this wasn't like you weren't a rookie who thought he saw something and then, was convinced otherwise later. So,
well, even whether you're a rookie or not, the systems we use right now are incredibly advanced and capable, and they're what we put our lives in every day. And so at the end of the day, it's either we trust our equipment or we don't, and we trust our eyes or we don't. And whether you're a rookie or not, at the end of the day, you gotta trust that instinct. Unfortunately, we did have other factors confounding that ability to communicate that freely, which was just a social stigma and things of that nature that arise with this particular topic. But yeah, multiple sensors is where it's at.
Okay, so that's fair. That's fair. I shouldn't have said rookie because that's really condescending of me, and that's dumb. We want to stay away from that.
That's just kind of the mentality we have. Once you get to that point, you got your wings on at least. But there are new guys, and there are people that have been around longer. At that point, I had I joined my squadron on deployment, so I had about a half of a deployment under my belt, and I had come back and I was going through basically the meat and potatoes of your tactical training as a fighter pilot, going to be training to be a tactical flight lead, things of that nature. I'll just say I was very comfortable with the systems that I was using, on a daily basis at that point.
You were seeing things. You're technically at the top of your game with respect to flying these vehicles. You are trained, you know what you're doing, and you're seeing something that others aren't seeing. Was there hesitation by your colleagues and yourself to disclose what you were seeing at first?
So I think there was a few ways that kind of happened. When we were seeing things on the radar, it was very much a joke that we're seeing UFOs. And then we see things on the FLIR, it was less joking because there was an actual safety threat. But then when we kind of ran out of reasonable options for what it could be, we as a group kind of came to the conclusion that we didn't have any more reasonable explanation for what it was, kind of at not so many words, and then it kind of went into the realm of the funny thing we're not necessarily going to be talking about until, unfortunately, we have to, because this is probably going to be, this has high potential to be an accident or midair or something of that nature. And so we recognize that it could be a problem, and that's what we're trained to do, to recognize these types of hazards. Mm-hmm. We're very good at it. But even still, I would say, even having that evidence, just like perhaps someone that's had a near-death experience, we were as a group still hesitant to take a proactive step to correct the situation, just because it was kind of past that kind of believability thing. And that's really what I've been trying to push, is to, encourage people to not necessarily have that kind of mental block and to feel more comfortable with exploring these anomalies, even if some cases they turn out to be, nothing special. That's just part of the process.